Black metal is a uniquely heretical genre of music, defiling and profaning everything in its path, and communists have much to learn from it, not only to critique the repressive consequences of religion and capitalism, but to root out dogmatism that makes its way into our thoughts. These words conclude Bill Peel's upcoming work, Tonight It's a World We Bury. Black Metal, Red Politics, out soon on Repeater Books. And on this second episode of Baroque Sunbursts, myself and John, aka the Lit Riffs Guy, are joined by none other than Bill himself and Fabian from Black Metal Partisanos Dawn Raid to talk everything Krieg, cults, and how to distort one's way out of capitalist modernity. Bill, Fabian, welcome to Baroque Sunbursts.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So just to get things kicked off, I mean, there's a weird taboo, at least I've noticed in black metal scenes, particularly around London, at least, well, possibly before the lockdowns are really, but there's this overwhelming sense of which there's a taboo on politics being interwoven with black metal, or even philosophy and theory interwoven with black metal. And one of the things I really like about your book, Bill, is how you talk about the various disavowals of politics that are central to the way the black metal likes to construct itself. And just if we can begin by sort of unpacking this taboo in terms of the ways in which the political is disavowed in sort of black metal circles, and of course both yours and Fabian, your own experiences with this kind of political disavowal, this uncomfortableness with politics when we talk about black metal.
Yeah, I think, what was it? I was really inspired by the idea of reflexive anti-reflexivity in the intro to the book, about this idea that like everyone kind of knows about certain people's politics, or like the consequences of certain people's politics. But thankfully, bringing those up would be so socially and commercially unacceptable that you kind of have to pretend, I don't know, you have to pretend that you're an apolitical band, that you're just kind of dabbling with these ideas for like pure shock value. Recently, there were a couple of gigs cancelled in Australia, actually. It was Tark and Aklice, I'm still never sure how to pronounce that. Bands who have both had associations, let's say, with Nazism or NSBM or what have you. And it's like, it's the playbook every single time. You know, we're like, an activist group will make a stink about it, rightfully so, to the promoter or to the venues or whatever. Then the band puts out a statement saying, oh, you know, we're not a political band. We disavow politics. We're just kind of dabbling with these ideas for shock value, blah, blah, blah. It happens all the time. And in the intro to the book, there's an Australian band I make reference to where they've got album titles like The Yoga of National Socialism, and there's like black suns and symbols of the Order of Nine Angles all over all of their artwork. But again, like all the posts by the band say, this is not political, you know, our nature is not a political band. I don't really see how you could possibly make that assumption. But yeah, again, like I said, it's a good thing that for now, these associations remain commercially unacceptable, but you know, it's the nature of it.
If I could frame particularly in terms of your experience, Fabian, I mean, was there a kind of there was. I mean, what was the sort of reaction to Dawn Raid putting like, this is political. This is a political statement. I mean, I remember when the first record came out, there was, at least in circles I was in, was like there was like it was kind of a sense of, oh, fucking finally, like it's always been kind of political, but now it's in the proper direction, kind of thing.
So to be entirely transparent, we didn't predict the response that we would have there. We didn't predict that people would find it as or as out there or as unique as it was made out to be, whether that be positive or negative. We came from a background of playing in extreme music bands that played in squats around Europe. We played in anarchist spaces, we played in social centres, we played in autonomous centres. And as individuals, we were all openly anarchist and anti-fascist and against oppressive politics. And we all loved black metal and have loved black metal for a very long time. And we were aware of the problems that like Bill's talked about, you know, the cowardice of not saying what you believe, and the thinly veiled metaphors, and the public denials with the secret hints or the not so secret hints at what they truly believe. So For us, it was out of necessity that we were so explicit, because some of the autonomous centers were a bit suspicious when a black metal band wanted to turn up and play, because of the history of black metal and the very contemporary history of it. So we were just like, yeah, listen, we're still the same people. We're still anarchists. We're still explicitly and openly and committed anti-fascists. And you don't need to worry about us. So we put it out there. When it came to songwriting, like, this is what we write about. This is who we are. So while we wanted to make some clear statements, the songs we write are emotional responses to the world around us. And politics inevitably finds its way in there. But it is music, it is art. It's not politics, but of course it weaves its way through. But yeah, I really liked when Bill talked about the reflexive anti-reflexivity, this ridiculous state that we end in, where people disavow their politics on one hand and then clearly show it on the other. I would be embarrassed to do that, but that's where those folks are at.
It's so interesting what you both said, which is like, there's the impression that I get is like, I'm obviously I'm nowhere near as familiar with like this kind of neo-Nazi black metal and the kind of history of it as you and Bill are, but like there's something about it where it's like you've almost fallen into, there's like the trap that's been set up where you go, oh, we'll put out all of these kind of dog whistles, these thinly, but if you take it seriously and actually assume the intent that's behind it, there's a kind of disavowal of the political, which strikes me as something that crops up a lot in like contemporary far right politics more generally, where they go, oh no, it's just irony, it's just memes. And you actually no, you're trying to kind of like excavate out this meaning of it, reducing it solely to kind of like these symbolic gestures. So it's like it's such a cool thing to hear of like musicians who just go, we are that. This is what we believe. We won't deny the kind of political valence of any of this, and actually just be incredibly straightforward, because it's that genuine sincerity of political commitment, which I think is the shock now, right? We're all supposed to do the thing of like, oh, we don't really mean that. We don't, it's just, but actually it's genuinely shocking. There's a kind of transgressive possibility to just kind of being like, no, that is what we are. We are anarchists. This is what we believe. This isn't just the kind of noise. And so there is actual kind of content behind this. So I think anti-reflexivity point that you make in the introduction, Bill, such kind of like a valuable tool, not just for this kind of cultural analysis, but like is maybe symptomatic of our contemporary politics more generally.
Again, like I said Adam, like I said in the introduction as well, like, for all the valid criticisms of a guy like Slavoj Žižek, like, I think he's correct in saying that this is kind of how capitalism like has to function. Like, you have to pretend as though you're the consequences of your purchases have no effect. Otherwise, you would just be like terminally miserable for your entire life. We all have phones, we all have computers. Like, you kind of have to ignore these things so that you can continue living your life, basically. Yeah. I am kind of just reiterating what Zizek says there, but I think I think in general it's a good point of how that idea can function more broadly.
Well, do you think that we have to? The reference there is amazing for black metal, especially the problematic black metal. But to move away from that, do you think we have to ignore these things, or do you think that we can actually, at some level, accept the contradiction and sort of internalize that contradiction and find some reconciliation with it, to understand that we, rather than ignore it, we have to accept it and sort of move through it and past it?
Well, no, of course. I mean, because if you don't, I mean, you end up just with like, you end up kind of mired in commodity fetishism, and you can just assume like it has to be this way, right? Like, I was about to say your average person that might not be aware of these things, but I think everyone is aware. They're just operating on that reflexivity. But no, of course, I think like the goal is to go beyond it. I mean, we're all socialists of one stripe or another. And like I said, in black metal, right, the point is to overcome that reflexivity.
And even to build on that Zizekian point, is that one of the things that one of Zizek's favorite examples of this, breaking past this reflexivity, is actually finding ways to enjoy it that also subvert it. So he always gives the example of Rammstein taking upon this very regimented, very Germanic way of things. I mean, for example, the video for Deutschland, which is an entire video about how horrific Germany as an idea is, and how the horrific, genocidal parts of German history even before the existence of the nation state. So at least in terms of when I sort of first encountered Dawn Raid, it was very much in the same time that folky black metal in Britain was having a renaissance. Now, the problem was that a lot of this folky black metal liked to call itself English heritage black metal, and used to have loads of songs which weren't political. They were just about how much they wanted to shag a Lake District or something, which not naming any bad. Oh, I can't name some bands, and it was interesting because the folky aspect was a way of reflexively sort of disavowing the very nationalist enjoyments inherent in that wave of black metal bands. And so the folky aspect of black metal became almost identified with this particular, and the genre was called English heritage black metal sound. It was good to find ways of enjoying the folky aspect, but from a position of, I guess, to use Deleuze and Guitar, a minor position rather than the major position of using it to signify a nation. So that's what I just really appreciated at the time when me and my friends were first discovering these records.
I think, English heritage black metal is pretty hilarious to me. Their claims to folk music and the heritage of folk music. I wonder if they've ever even listened to any of the important figures who've moved through that scene, because they seem to talk a lot about folk music, and we all know the bands that we're talking about, the English heritage black metal bands. They love to claim some link or lineage to folk music, but have none of the stylistic tropes of that, and none of the themes of that, and no real understanding of folk or trad traditions. Like, for sure, we love folk music. It's there, it's clear in Dawn Raid and in loads of other amazing black metal bands and lots of other genres. But yeah, I think they like the sound of acoustic guitars rather than the themes of folk music. And like you say, it was a convenient way for them to love the nation and not the land, rather than love the land and hate the nation.
Couldn't put it better myself. John, do you have a question, or I've got one I can move on to on the list?
No, let's move on. What's your next question? Okay,
so one of the questions I really thought was really well addressed in your book, Bill, particularly the question of black metal being so inherently, because as you characterize black metal with two main components. One is the fundamental negative use of distortion, and two, a hatred of modernity. But there's a fundamental risk there where black metal is so defined by being against the mainstream. This is actually metal in general, in some extent. You define yourself against the mainstream moves on, becomes more progressive, and then suddenly you're reacting to it. And I guess the question to frame the sort of the political stakes of black metal is, how does one navigate being in opposition to the world without simply being only in opposition to it and not actually not having any sense of what you're really opposing, to escaping the sort of the nihilistic escape from the world versus desiring something about the world such that you can think about changing it?
I think the distortion chapter, which is like the first main chapter of the book, is really all about overcoming that idea of like opposing the world. You kind of end up just getting trapped in these very familiar ideas. And if you look into the history of black metal, like at the very, very start, guys like Venom, right, that aren't even really considered black metal by today's standards, they never really did anything out of that oppositional ethos. It was always like, we're just going to do something different. We don't really care what we're called. And the black metal label was kind of put on them retroactively. And I'm quite critical of those like bands in the mid-90s who kind of constantly make reference to that kind of like, it's like a pure black metal, right? This idea of like, you've built a fortress around yourself of like basically three bands like Burzum, Mayhem, and Darkthrone. And that's the constant thing you're making reference to, like you can't escape these things. And I think I in general, I think that kind of repetition is very negative, because like I said, it puts you in a box. It puts you in a very familiar position. It makes you uncomfortable. Like, it makes you uncomfortable to the outside world. But as capitalism itself does, it always moves on, right? Like, culture always moves on. You can't just keep yourself in one position. And I think it's good to see that black metal in general seems to be more interested in expanding. You know, there's bands like Imperial Triumphant or Backwash or Violet Cold. I can never remember. I always get the name the wrong way around. Yeah, but and like I said, it's a very reactive position towards modernity as well. Like, you refuse to engage with it, so you kind of disappear into you know, you like want to live off the grid or whatever, which I'm sure a lot of people want to do. But like I said, like, you can't escape anything. You can't escape capitalism on a global scale. You have to overcome it, like, socially and collectively.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Well, 100%. The second you step outside the trinity of true black metal and you start to diversify the sounds that are involved in it, and whether it be using different types of distortion or using different types of tremolo or different influences, like Imperial Triumphant are a great example of that, you are becoming transgressive as regards to the true nature of black metal. But if you just stay within that, you're no longer transgressing against the mainstream, because that music has become very safe. Those classics are safe. And as the context that it's created in changes, if you become a nostalgia act, you become an act for people who really love the first Dark, or the, you know, first Mayhem records, early Darkthrone. You become just somebody who recreates that, which is not the intention. Which is not the intention of those records. The intention of those records was to rail against something, not to recreate something. And I think, yeah, capitalism is moving forward, but every social context is moving forward. And to continue to be transgressive, to continue to be anti-capitalist, however way you want to frame that, you also have to transgress the rules that were set before you. But you have to know the rules to be able to transgress them as well.
I just wanted to say, I think one of the really valuable things about that chapter is the argument you make drawing off hegemony and socialist strategy from Lachlo and Muff. This idea of like reintroducing antagonism, you know, naming it made me think of Jodie Dean's famous line where she says, like, I like to describe myself as a communist because to call oneself a communist is to name the antagonism, right? You can call yourself an anti-capitalist and that's fine, but like, you name the not only the negation, but the negation of that negation in the positive construction of communism, right? When you kind of claim that label for yourself. And I think this is the kind of dialectical tension within this act of negation is to say that yes, there is much in like the world has to be buried, but to bury it is to place it underneath something which is yet to come into being, which is necessarily to kind of like presuppose not just the annihilation of the present, but the question of what the future is going to be, right? To say that the world could be otherwise is not just a negative statement or a statement about like what we don't want to see, but even by its absence, you're raising the question of what could come into being when the world has been buried. You know, what new thing will be on top of it?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And like what you said about calling yourself a communist rather than more simply anti-capitalist, that's something I 100% agree with as well. Just because, like you said, you're naming an antagonist, you're putting yourself in an antagonistic position. Like, because you can say anti-capitalist and that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I've heard fascists calling themselves anti-capitalist as well. And yeah, like you said about burying the world, I think that's very useful because it helps us think about the future in like a non-deterministic kind of way. Like I said, you don't want to make what was Marx's phrase? Like recipes for the cook shops of the future. So that's something I absolutely agree with as well. Like, it's a pithy title and I think it works, but it's also useful in thinking through that effect.
I also want to pick up on, we mentioned sort of, this affect in black metal of escaping to the woods, but really the limits of that sort of negational thinking is that it's never a tactical withdrawal. It's just a pure flight away from things. Whereas in sort of let's say the left wing of the black metal scene these days, you've got people who sort of depart from the grid a little bit. They go and live in the woods, say like a Margaret Killjoy from Feminat School. And it's not simply to abandon the world, it's so that you can get a tactical place of respite, so you can run back into the fray and start projecting, new desires, new ways there. And I really love the distortion chapter, because I think one of my bugbears of black metal theory was linking in too much to a uniqueness of black metal, whereas black metal actually it's not so much the uniqueness of it, but it's just a really good example. I mean, the way of distortion transgressing perfection it's something I have to admit, it's something I don't think I can escape thinking of in the black metal way. So I used to be in a harsh noise band, like power electronics kind of thing, and we'd always get the best gigs. It was like black metal. Like we played once like Anal Nafrak or something, and like way better than the noise crowd for that sort of thing. But I really think one of the strengths of this book is its theory of the distortion, as rather than difference, it's purely negative, as like a different kind of difference than difference from the mainstream, one that could really add a really strong layer of positivity to it. I mean, but if thinking about this tactical withdrawal, one of the things I think is the most ingenious about this work is how it links like the communization theory of someone like Tikkun or the Invisible Committee, stuff like the coming insurrection, to black metal, through this amazing model of the black circle. Now, I was wondering, could we unpack the black circle as its history in black metal as sort of a weird organizing tactic, and how that works, and how you think it provides a really, it's a model that you really got to appropriate from the other side. I mean, even in the title of the book, it's a Deathspell Omega lyric. You say it's not a reclamation. It's libidinally charged appropriation for a new world, and these fascist idiots have no idea what they're actually dealing with.
Yeah, no, thank you for being so positive about the black circles. Basically, I saw that as a kind of like secret, a kind of like revolutionary secret society. The history of it is not necessarily that revolutionary, let's face it. Like, it was really just a bunch of 16-year-olds in Norway with like middle-class parents. But basically, like it was my conclusion of like a kind of revolutionary unit to come to, using that kind of the politics of like non-recognition and like a way of organizing in secret, more or less. And so, yeah, there was the first Black Circle, which is, again, Mayhem, Burzum, Darkthrone, all those guys. But I list quite a few. So there was the French one that was very clearly based off the Norwegian one, the La Légions Noires. I can't speak French, so apologies for that. And there was the German one as well, Die Teutonic Bruderschaft, if I remember correctly. Again, I don't speak German, so Adam's probably better than me at that. But I think they all understood themselves to be these kind of like revolutionary units. But like I said, like they were mostly just teenagers with middle-class parents. But despite that, I think there is a useful thing there. There is a useful model to draw from, in the way that like Marx and Engels were very inspired by the German peasants movement in like the 1600s and 1700s. But they say, this isn't like a model that you should aspire to be exactly like. This is just something you can draw from, and you can draw from their experiences and build off them.
So would we say that there's any sort of isomorphism between the organizing that keeps, say, a political scene together, and any sort of latent potential that comes from, say, a music scene, even organizing a gig? Is there any sort of isomorphism there where we could build movements partially out of a coalition of linkages that could start or could benefit from integration in some of these musical spaces?
I guess, all of these things end up being these kind of rhizome networks, right? Like no band is inherently connected to any other band. And that's how these things are often connected, like especially more modern ones, I find, like the Black Legion, the Black Twilight Circle in California. Like it's kind of defunct now, more or less. But yeah, it was basically just like 3 guys, more or less, and they were all making music and just switching bands. And I find there's something very interesting about that, in that, like I said, in that rhizomatic sense of like constantly shifting gears and constantly changing instruments. And it doesn't let yourself be, again, recognized. I don't want to focus too much on that, the term politics of recognition, but that was where that part was coming from.
Well, I've got a question that I'd be super interested to get both of your takes on, actually, which is, the one of the chapters that really stood out to me with my background in kind of like horror studies and Gothic studies is the chapter on death and decay, particularly in the context of an increasing. I mean, I thought it was amazing you brought up The Mushroom at the End of the World, Anna Singh's brilliant book on kind of ecology, and I just was hoping you could maybe unpack a little bit of like, what does death, the kind of death fetishism that you talk about, look like now in an era where capitalism increasingly kind of runs up against its own limit, and the limit is kind of life itself, right? All of our own shared contingency, our shared fragility. I'm thinking like in the context of the pandemic, right? What were we kind of viscerally reminded of? One, where actual labor power still resides, and two, the kind of inherent fragility of our own body and our own kind of shared connectivity, right? It was in the air that we were all breathing. There was this thing that was coming. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you both think about that in the context of that chapter.
Thank you for mentioning that you liked Anna Singh. I thought that was a very useful reference. Like, I come to these things. My background is in anthropology, and she's one of those anthropologists that I think is very useful to think through these things. And I kind of use death fetishism as like a negative reference to kind of think through, okay, how do we not get trapped in the past, as black metal is often so used to doing? As I said, I think, yeah, I'm not too aware of the politics of death, but obviously, like you said, the pandemic has brought these things into pretty sharp relief. And like, I feel extremely lucky coming from Australia, where obviously every country was hit hard in different ways, but Australia was left relatively well off during the pandemic. It's actually getting worse now, but we won't talk about that. But I basically, yeah, like I said, I used death fetishism as a way to think through, okay, like black metal is obsessed with death, but we should say death also brings forth potential, right? I read Lucretius after finishing the chapter, but I thought Lucretius was a very good reference because he's very focused on, okay, death brings decay, but decay allows things to grow, right? And that's not to say that we should do this kind of vulgar accelerationist position of like, okay, accelerate death so that you can kind of springboard into the future. But instead, it's a way of not thinking negatively, or not thinking as negatively, or not thinking as nostalgically as is often common in socialist groups or the left in general, as well as black metal.
I love the concept of death fetishism within black metal. And as I read through it, I thought that the death fetishism, rather than being a rejection of the capitalist idea around life and death, I think it was just another example of a death-denying society under capitalism, where death is seen as something to fetishize and embrace and hold up and project ideas onto that aren't correct. And that death fetishism of death and mayhem and the early days of black metal that carries on through is just as naive as the hyper-capitalists who are desperate to prolong their life through artificial means or through fantasy science. And somewhere within that is missing some genuine internalization of the fact that we are going to die. This is a natural process. Everything around us is dying and growing again. And as you finish it off, there can be something to take from that decay, and not in a capitalist or accelerationist approach, but this is just a fact of life, and accepting that is a much more honest way to understand ourselves. And fetishizing it is just a reaction to the capitalist idea of denying it.
Absolutely. And I think, you've set up a really useful kind of pairing in that chapter, Bill, between this death fetishism and the kind of politics of decay, this idea of like what emerges out of the decay. And I love the point, Fabian, about like death as process and the inescapability of that process that we are all from the very beginning of our lives involved in some ways. And it's constantly kind of pushed off into being this absolute horizon, this limit, when you turn it into the fetish object. But I think what I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on is like, Bill, you make the point that often like the left can kind of collapse into this nostalgia of looking back. And I think in the context of environmentalism, the nostalgia of the right, the nostalgia of that black metal is a kind of emergent eco-fascism where, you know, and I think this ties into what we were talking about with this kind of heritage black metal as well. I'm just interested to know both of your thoughts on what is the response to that, both musically, sonically, but also like politically and philosophically.
Yeah, I think like I mentioned towards the end of the Decay chapter, is that the habit among eco-fascists is to claim that they have the real idea of the environment that is kind of dominant. And it's particularly like a white European idea of the environment as the kind of steward of humanity, and that we need to return to it, right? That's the kind of mean phrase, right? Return to tradition, return to these kind of communal villages. But the whole point is that you can't go back, right? You can't like return to some idea of the environment before capitalism started or before like urban industrial environments started. You can't turn back the clock on that. And I think, like I mentioned, and in that part of the chapter, I mentioned Julius Evola as a reference, as like, again, a negative reference, because he's a person who is very popular among a lot of eco-fascists for this idea of like the circle, right? The eternal, I'm not going to say the eternal return because I don't understand that nearly enough to make that reference, but it's this idea of time as being cyclic. And, you know, again, which is very popular among accelerationists, you know, we have to like accelerate the destruction of cities so that, you know, millions and millions and millions of people die so we can all return to these kind of communal farms, as if those villages and environments would remain even something, you know, resembling what they did in the 1400s in Germany, for example.
I don't know. I'm guessing, given the people who are on this call, most of you are probably familiar with 12 Rules for What, an anti-fascist podcast in the UK. The folks involved in that wrote an amazing book about the rise of eco-fascism, which is an exceptional resource to understand where we find ourselves. And ultimately, eco-fascism is it's a fallacy. They, like Will has just highlighted, they look backwards, and it's impossible to return to some pre-industrial state with the environment. We have to accept where we're at. It's very similar to the sort of the thinking that fascists get involved in around decay and death, and the sort of the fantasies they have to create to understand the facts of life that they struggle to reconcile. And ecofascism feels like an attempt to impose their hateful political worldview onto a problem that they see, and to assign blame or lay blame at the wrong door, aim to return to some state that is impossible to do, rather than to deal with the really difficult task of accepting where we're at and trying to prevent ecological disaster, or trying to at least limit the harshest elements of it. I think we can all accept that we've missed the chance to prevent it. Ecofascism within black metal, I think for most of the black metal artists who are fascist and use or pretend to have some ecological interest, I think it is pretend. I think it is dishonest. It's a trend for them rather than something they feel any sincere attachment to.
This idea of returning when it comes to black metal too is so fascinating for me, because it goes back even some of the earliest parts of the genre. And I'm not saying these artists are fascist or fascist adjacent, but say, for example, Bathory, the song One Road to Acid Bay, it's hearkening back to this time when, before the Christians came, we all lived in harmony of nature, and Christianity brings a kind of modernity. And this is exemplified in the main crimes, or I'm not really going to call it propaganda of the deed, because I don't think these people really believed in much, but the church burnings in Norway. I think it's like a sliding scale of maturity as a black metal fan when you grow up and realize, actually, this was a horrible thing to do. But there's this weird sense in which death and history and decay and the environment are all tied up in black metal. And one of the ways I find this particularly interesting is in relation to the genre known as depressive, I'm not going to say the second word, black metal. And particularly, there's a lot of fascists in that scene, I've noticed. For example, the Swedish band, actually, I have fuck it. Shining. Nicholas Gavarforth loves hanging out with fascists. He gets Hell's Angels to do his bodyguard work when he plays in Slovenia. I know that personally. But this obsession with the body being a vehicle only for death and only for victory, and even that be a fascist victory of ecological proportions or victory of historical proportions, is inherently tied to this rightward term where the body can only be used as a vehicle for this final victory. And there's a weird bastardization of Nietzsche that happens in these circles. And I'm guessing that this ideology of superiority really does feed into the core of this disruption of death, this denial that death only happens for this heroic sacrifice, as in famously in the example of Dead, whose death kind of inaugurates the founding mythology of black metal.
Yeah, I think in DSBM, I'm going to use the acronym. I think it's very, I hate to call it like edgy, but I think edgy bullshit is like a large portion of the genre. And it fits into this idea that like black metal specifically is for white male teenagers suffering this kind of existential ennui. And I think the response to it is, again, like a kind of reactionary, like anti-modernity. And like you said, there is like an aspect of like Nietzschean self-sacrifice to it, where I refer to a band, I think they're Australian from memory, but Advent Sorrow in the book, who specifically refer to, in the Decay chapter, I should say, who specifically refer to the Kali Yuga, right? Which is the Evolian, well, I'm not going to say it's from Evola, but that's how most people are familiar with it now. But that kind of Hindu idea of like, accelerating the process of going towards the dark age so that you turn to the golden age, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's popular in DSBM because it gives you something to hope for that is completely is outside of your grasp personally. So it kind of gives your life this meaning of like, oh, I helped personally accelerate the dark age or whatever, when again, you're primarily just, making music or even you're listening to music and not fighting for any sort of broader social change, I suppose.
I think a band like Shining especially are really trying to play with struggles that people sincerely feel. And Nicholas Carforth might present one part of themselves to try and identify with people who may identify back with what they're singing about and how they choose to present. But again, it's dishonest. We know about all of his antics. We know about his disappearance and then returning live and all of the ridiculous shock tactics that he used to try and generate hype for his mediocre band. And it feels, especially with the genre like the SPM and the themes that they choose to deal with, it feels especially dishonest when you see Shining and their antics. And I don't know if it's like also eloquently put. It doesn't feel like it's part of anything bigger. It feels like it's purely for not art or music, but purely to try and drive sales and interest.
We can see a sort of fascist convergence here between the nihilism and essentially the nihilism against the modern world and taking any ideology which offers you an apocalypse, essentially. Well, an end of the world, a destruction of the world. And it's interesting to see how these, especially as going back to the Distortion chapter, how we can start using black metal as a vehicle for, fuck this world, but there's another world that is latently possible. And there's like an Ernst Blockian like principle. There's a weird hopefulness to any kind of left black metal in which you have to first burn down the world and then go, well, don't worry, there's a phoenix aspect for this. It doesn't have to come through destruction of the body or Travarforth's. I mean, everyone listen to the Norwegian band Shining. They have a lovely album that's like a jazz black metal album. Way better, folks, for the listeners. But
yeah, I think the thing that I kind of think is an obvious next step then is if I can, personally, my favorite chapter of the book is the one on heresy. By my background is in kind of horror and religion. So this was like absolutely something I was fascinated by. And this idea of like heresy is the ground of the new, right? Because that's where the antithetical ideas emerge out of. And, Bill, I should say thank you. It's how you introduced me to Gelassenheit, who quickly became one of my favorite bands after reading this book. And I just wanted, I think the question is then, what is the heresy of the contemporary moment? If as when black metal emerged in the 90s, it was this kind of like the church burning, this staunchly anti-Christian atheism that quickly became a kind of tired series of like aesthetic posturing where you're not kind of willing to commit and follow that through to the genuinely hard work of creating new values. I'd love to know what you both think. What does heresy look as a kind of core ingredient of contemporary black metal?
Like I introduced that chapter, I sort of posit black metal and Marx and Nietzsche and Wilhelm Reich kind of against the trend of new atheism, which emerged kind of in the mid-2000s. But it would, like new atheism, it would kind of fight religion on purely like rationalist grounds. And a lot of the arguments would revolve around religion's facticity, right? Like kind of interminable debates with people like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens talking about, oh my God, this specific thing, like it disproves religion, as if people who are religious believe in the entire facticity of all of it. And instead, I think what Marx and Nietzsche and Wilhelm Reich do, and black metal does, it engages with, it debates religion on the ground of how it actually affects people's lives and the way that they live, right? On the one hand, it can obviously provide a great deal of meaning. That's not disputed. But on the other hand, like religion is also responsible for obviously many people's lives or many people's suffering in a lot of broad ways. And so I try not to, like a lot of the book, in that chapter, I try not to get stuck in this old idea of heresy being specifically against, Christianity in Norway in the 90s. And the solution would be burning churches, killing Christians, yada, yada, and kind of aiming to return to this like paganism, which, as we've already talked about, oftentimes is just kind of a face for like eco-fascism or, supposed eco-fascism is really just fascism. Instead, the goal is to be like continually heretical against new forms, I guess, that could spring themselves up in new forms of dogmatism, including I would put militant atheism and new atheism in that category as well.
What an amazing question. What is heresy in black metal today? I think that what heresy is a lot easier to find with what's not heretical about black metal today, and reproducing the heresies of Norwegian teenagers in the 90s is no longer heretical, for sure. And we talked a lot about church burnings, and it's something that's quite cool about the book as well. Like, the concept of church burnings is not something that is disagreeable with Don Reid, particularly when we talk about Durruti and the Spanish Civil War and what a church can illuminate, or how a church could illuminate for us. And I agree with you about the new atheists as well, and dogma, for sure. Like, this has to be a rejection of dogma, and there has to be an acceptance of people who want a spiritual existence as well. And a spiritual existence can be valid, and it can be valid in a heretical way. And I think that to be truly a heretic in the black metal world today, I think it is about rejecting dogma, for sure. It's about rejecting dogmatic religion or dogmatic atheism or any authoritarian or dogmatic truth. But yeah, I really struggle to know what being heretical is going to mean nowadays. I think since we talk in your chapter on secrecy, you talk about how important secrecy is. You talk about confessional art in black metal. Is it heretical to be honest, to be straightforward, and to be open about what you say, and to be tolerant of what other people think and believe?
And towards the end of that chapter, I end up putting together a kind of relationship between that kind of very old heretical black metal like Mayhem, Darkthrone, and Christian black metal, specifically like your more standard, like the bands you would normally associate with Christian black metal, like Horde, and I forget the other one, like Antester, that sort of thing, where you kind of end up stuck in this relationship where you're constantly shadow boxing each other instead of doing anything interesting. And it's very funny that if you look at, like, for that section, I looked at some lyrics, and like basically if you swap around the lyrics for Christian bands and black metal and heretical black metal bands, they look basically similar. Oh, like almost identical. It's just one is looking at it positively and the other is looking at it negatively. And that's why I bring up Liturgy and Gelassenheit as good references for like what Christian black metal can do that isn't just stuck in like this negative relationship or just negating heretical black metal. And I'm very happy that people that I've had a few people tell me that they've gotten into Gelassenheit since reading the book. So I'm very happy about that. And she's a very weird musician. It was a lot of fun talking to her and listening to that music. Yeah.
I think it's also very good. I mean, thinking back to the idea of the church burning, and Fabian, when you bring up Durruti, and I'm like, actually, yes, the church burning is actually a very interesting historical point of antagonism between the left and the right appropriating it in song. Because, so, the German Peasants' War, one of the most famous commanders in that was a man called Florian Geyer. And there was a song called Des Geyers Schwarze Haufen, the Black Legions of Florian Geyer. He was a mercenary. He led some peasants. They had a black shoe on their flag. And the lyrics to this song is a song that was sung both in East Germany and under the Nazis, but written as a peasants' war song. So there's an inherent antagonism to this. And the chorus is Spieß voran, drauf und dran, setz on Klosterdach den roten Helm, which is the spear forwards, onwards, upwards, and it literally means put the red chicken on the cloister, which is another way of saying make it look like a giant red chicken spire because you set it on fire. And didn't mean that to rhyme, but that's a good way of translating it. And this even happens in black metal itself. I mean, for example, the fascist Henrik Möbus, Absurd, do a song, and they rename it to Des Wotan Schwarze Haufen, which is a cover of it. And if you Google this, like, German Peasants' War song about taking down the nobles and the priests, you know, spill their noble blood, to quote a Dawn Raid t-shirt that no longer fits me. It is actually the point of antagonism itself within the setting of the church burning. And I just really appreciated sort of focusing on that central, almost archetypal image of black metal as the antagonism, because you can see it being deterritorialized to the left, reterritorialized to the right, constantly throughout the history of music from below. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that.
And sorry to jump in, but again, as I say towards the end of that chapter, like a lot of right-wingers call themselves heretics in this way, but they have no problem with actual churches. Like, I think I refer to Curtis Yarvin or Mencius Mollberg and his idea of like the cathedral, right? This idea of like, it's basically just sort of like a shitty rehashed idea of hegemony. And in the piece that term comes from, he specifically says he has no problem with actual cathedrals. So it's clearly this like right-wing thing where they act as heretics and like anti-dogmatism. But as I'm sure we're all aware of, they're never going to give up certain institutions like actual church or the state or the traditional family or any of these sort of modes.
If the church did not exist to cancel Nurgle, Behemoth will never be able to fund their next album.
Yeah, I think for me, the act of church burning as a radical act is a rejection of power and a rejection of authority. For a fascist, it's an attempt to appropriate the authority of the church or to claim the authority of the church as they reproduce the state and reproduce power in their image and how they see it should be handled by them rather than a true rejection of what they believe. And fascists have forever used the church to wield their power and enforce their rules.
I think that's exactly right, and I think the contested history, the kind of knots of discourse that wherein black metal situates itself often get reduced into really, really lazy, really antagonistic historiography and politics and music as well. Like, you know, this unblack metal, and I can't, which when I read it, I was like, I can't imagine anything more embarrassing for someone who is sincerely religious than the inverted cross lyric that you quote in the book, which was like just embarrassing. But at the same time, you're completely right that like the church has often been a symbol of power, that peasants were burned down in the peasant wars in Germany during the Reformation, but also, you know, worker priests in Latin America took up arms against the army. And, you know, you have figures like Oscar Romero, who was shot in the middle of conducting mass by soldiers from the government and was assassinated in the middle of a church service. You know, there's blood in the church, and how it gets there is it can come from, it's both of these kind of questions, and what that means and what it can be made to mean symbolically, I think, is a really powerful example of this notion of profaning everything, as you put it at the end of that chapter, Bill.
Should we actually unpack the idea of profanation quite a bit? Because profanation, is there an antagonism between profanation and transgression? Because in a way, it's like sort of the right wing of black metal is always kind of transgressive. It's always like looking at a boundary and going, oh, and it's like just stepping over it, thinking it's done. Whereas profanation, if anything, doesn't so much transgress the law, but takes it away from its status as a sacred symbol from which one can profane it. If anything, it's more damaging to profane something than to transgress it. Maybe you can transgress in a church by, you know, going behind or, you know, drinking all the communion wine, as some mercenaries would have done to the towns, to the peasant towns who were, you know, they would invade them, destroy it, drink that. But the peasant revolts, no, they set them on fire. Is there a tension between transgression and profanation at the heart of this that may deviate the two ways of relating to black metal's negativity?
Well, like you said before, I think transgression, like with the example of Nurgle and Behemoth, I think transgression necessarily needs to leave those institutions in place and kind of uphold their legitimacy to then kind of uphold your idea as the transgress, again, which is partly touched on in the distortion chapter as well. I think of the nature of the nature of this idea of the cathedral from Curtis Yarvin is that they all in all, they want to leave these institutions in place so they can just come off as the transgressive force while they all go and become reactionary Catholics for some reason. Whereas I think profanation is more a matter of like getting rid of those institutions completely, or at least the institutions that are illegitimate. And I think overall that's the difference between those two things. Like transgression wants to uphold the institutions and profanation wants to delegitimize them as much as is possible.
That's deliciously Agambenian, Tikkunist, insurrectionist. And this is why I really think that this book is like so focal and actually focusing the energies of any sort of black, or not black metal politics, as if black metal is going to be the banner, but any banner that can use black metal as a toolkit for resources. And I guess as we're coming up to the hour or so, my mind has gone completely blank. I apologize. I burned through most of my questions on this. John, do you have anything? Sorry. My mind has gone completely potty.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up, really talking about this idea of what does it mean to profane something. And there's Benjamin's wonderful phrase of the profane illumination, which is this explicitly materialist, anthropological, and secular process by which we come to understand the kind of wreckage of history, as you put it. And I think it fits really nicely with this idea of like not transgression is a kind of like negative relationship to an already existing authority, right? You need the boundary, otherwise there's nothing for you to transgress. And it really connects, I think, with the things that Fabian was saying about like isn't the great heresy now sincerity? To actually refuse the endless inescapable trap of like, oh, we don't really mean this, you know, we're just being ironic, or it's just a symbol, or we're just experimenting with an edgy aesthetic. You go, no, actually we do believe this. We do believe that the world can be burn down into to ash, and from the ashes something better can be made. And I think this connects really powerfully to what you were talking about, Bill, in the book, with this idea of like resisting the kind of teleology. You know, this idea when you reify black metal into, oh, it has to be this, it has to recreate exactly these three bands, and it can't be any. You've turned what should be a kind of like process into a static reified form, into which instead of profaning anything, you just endlessly restaging the same kind of tired transgressions. I don't know if this is just too sort of simple, but it's like, is sincerity the last kind of great taboo? You know, maybe that's the question.
I think in part, yeah. Like, so long as that sincerity cannot be like kind of forced upon you and you're like made to speak, I suppose. I know Deleuze makes a comment about that somewhere, but I've forgotten where it is. But this way that like power makes you speak, even like inner compulsion can kind of make you speak and make you reveal yourself when you don't want to. So I think sincerity, yes, so long as it's just not a kind of compulsive sincerity that gives power everything. I don't think we should focus on self-revelation, but where we do actually make it sincere and actually like give a fuck about something. And again, like black metal, going back to like the very start of this conversation about the politics of it, like all of these kind of disavows of politics say, oh, we don't care about anything, right? We don't care about any earthly politics. It's all this kind of transcendence, these kind of transcendence ideas. But again, that's just to cover, just to not care about anything and not hope for anything. But no, I think sincerity is a good heresy against this idea that like irony should be the predominant way in which you do politics. Like the nation should be sincere, I guess is the way of putting it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think that there is a marketable side to confessional art, and like you talk about in your book, and a marketable side to sincerity. I also think it's worth being clear that whenever people choose to be authentic or be sincere, that they're only representing one part of their whole. And when people choose to present themselves as a member of a black metal band, for example, or as an artist, you're choosing what may be an authentic and a sincere part of them, but that's only one part of what makes them who they are. And for sure, they can choose to keep other parts back and present that at other time points whenever it feels right to do so. So it for sure it can be sincere and confessional, but it's never that sincerity or that confessional nature that gives power away.
Yeah, and I think that ties into what you were talking about in the context of like death and limitation, right? You know, and again, this I think the thing that I keep coming back to in everything that both of you have been saying is this notion of process rather than ends, right? All we see is kind of a brief snapshot, right, of revealed truth, you know, freely given, and it requires this kind of colossal act of like self emptying, of almost kenosis, and at the same time a kind of trust in the audience to be involved in that as well. So I think the thing that keeps coming up in everything that both you and Bill are saying is this notion of like, rather than any kind of absolute end point, there is this constant like movement in the process of becoming, right? What really maybe that question of like what is black metal is a kind of badly phrased question. It's like, well, what is the process in which black metal is a part?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing distillation of the entire discussion, that whether we're talking about death and decay, whether we're talking about distortion, whether we're talking about the true nature of black metal or of heresy within black metal, that however we define it now is constantly moving and evolving, making it really impossible to pin down, which is tough if you're writing books about it.
The communitarian aspect of black.
No, Adam, you go ahead.
I would just want to say, I think it's really important to highlight this communitarian aspect of black metal, because even the communitarian based black metal is what is often left behind in so many discussions, and even in the formats in which the the music tries to hide itself from the mainstream audience. That the one-man band one-person band is so, almost like a cliche of black metal in many ways, and yet there's an inherently communal urge of self-giving, producing a kind of oneself that you want to produce for the other in this communal way. And even the material roots of the struggle within black metal circles is absolutely a microcosm of the entire society. So, for example, when bands play certain venues and they're fascists and people try to kick them out, essentially you're relying on the goodwill of the promoter to not indulge that market audience. And that's because the material problem is that, for example, the structure of working men's clubs, the community has no say in how the venues are operated in terms of ownership or collective way in which they compose those spaces through that community, rather than temporarily borrowing them. For example, if you're a regular at a metal bar that has a gigs, for example. And these will bring the material questions of how do you build a community? Community ownership of venues would do a long way to sort of solve this problem of, because every time you let these fascist bands in, there's members of the community who are marginalized, who will feel like, if this isn't a safe space for me. If you can go to a metal bar and you've got all of these people with like Operation Werewolf patches on their jackets, and that's there's the complicity of the scene in these kinds of things. And I think this brings back to the unsung hero of black metal, the audience, is a brilliant way to highlight the communitarian aspect of the sound, and how not only does the performer distort themselves for sake of this community, but the audience themselves become distorted. I mean, people don't typically march. I know you're allowed to march at some black metal gigs, but people don't usually act like that in public for no reason.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, about how the audience. I mean, of course, the audience is a massive part of any music genre, and I think it's overwhelmingly positive that there have been more women and people of color and trans people becoming more of a prominent factor, not only in like bands, but audiences as well. I think the idea of community-owned venues is a good thing, of course, like as a material basis. But we can't also say that the community would not approve of some fascist bands, right? Again, in Australia, there have been big cases of venues being basically sold out before the venue is pressured to be pulled out. There was a gig by Destroyer 666. I think it was either last year or 2021 that this happened in Melbourne and Sydney, from memory. But again, those venues were overwhelmingly, or those bands were overwhelmingly popular before the venue was forced to pull out from pressure, right? So, like I said, community-owned venues is good, but there needs to be continued effort and struggle to not allow certain bands or certain ideologies into any movement. Yeah. So the community is not inherently good, I suppose, that sounds bad, but I think the ideologies that might be nascent in a community, or the certain disavowals that might be popular in a community, will still exist even in community-owned spaces, even though I do agree with community-owned spaces, inherently.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm really conscious on the time, so I didn't want to miss asking you, Bill, about your chapter on coldness, which was the chapter I enjoyed the most, as probably no surprise as an outspoken anarchist and somebody who really enjoyed Blessed is the Flame, despite some of the obvious problems with it. The negation described in your coldness chapter, and the negation described in Blessed is the Flame and the history of anarcho-nihilism, for me, captured what black metal is truly. Black metal is jouissance. These are, as well as being agitprop, as well as being a way to convey ideas, for sure, playing music, playing extreme metal in however way you want to define it, with a community around you. You're never going to be commercially successful playing in an extreme metal band that is radically left. That is jouissance. I wonder how you felt about anarcho-nihilism being black metal being a vehicle for anarcho-nihilism, and anarcho-nihilism being a very, very comfortable ideology to sit alongside the sound of black metal.
I think I'm glad you liked the chapter, even though I am fairly critical of Blessed is the Flame at the end. Anarcho-nihilism, I guess that part of the chapter is more about the politics of like vitalism, or the kind of obsession with like neo-vitalist politics, where it's this idea of there's no point in anything, right? So it's purely like destruction based, which again, like it can be useful as a starting point, right? But a hammer can be used to destroy, but you also need to build with it, I suppose. And I think Adorno gets a fair amount of criticism for his kind of reactionary to the student movement. But I think overwhelmingly he's correct in saying that that kind of neo-vitalism, or it's like almost like a nihilist vitalism, and the obsession with like, we just have to destroy things right now. We can't build anything. There's no point in even trying to build anything. I think overwhelmingly, like I think it's kind of resigned, which is Adorno's way of putting it. It's kind of resignation, of saying like, we can't build anything. We shouldn't try. Instead, we should act these like purely destructive acts, which, like you said, right? Like about the church burning, obviously it's not against Dornrade's politics, right? But there's a difference between like kind of church burning and also building other institutions, or not even building other institutions, but building other ways of living that are outside of the church, I suppose. And there is this kind of expectation that that is possible in doing that. Whereas blessed is the flame. It's got some good parts, not to harp on it. Like I'm a big fan of anti-Nazi action, let's say, well, being delicate. But I think you just don't want to fall into this trap of saying there is no hope. That's the reason why we're acting is that there is no hope, which is something that I disagree with.
Is it possible to hold, like, anarcho-nihilism was an important trend for me philosophically, and from reading Desert, reading Blessed is the Flame, coming through an anarcho-syndicalist and class-based approach entirely, and realizing, and then becoming anarchist without adjectives, and being able to hold multiple different ideas at the same time, which we can all do. Is it possible? I know that you were critical of Blessed is the Flame, which is partly why I really enjoyed bringing it up, but equally, like, you clearly took something from it and its relationship to black metal. But is it possible that we can use the anarcho-nihilist trend as a way to become frozen by the burden of capitalism and the burden of ecological disaster and the burden of what we have to oppose, and the idea of jouissance unsticks us. It's our antifreeze. It allows us to act without having to think about the burden of what we're going to build to, the burden of our opposition, how big all of that is. And jouissance, that action for action's sake, the uncivilized desire, acting where we stand at that moment and accepting that there's inherent value in that, allows us to get out of our ennui, allows us not to become another DSBM band, and instead to return to being revolutionaries.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I think like jouissance, I think through these things mostly as like a starting point, right? So like I said, I'm not opposed to the actions taken in Blessed is the Flame. It's more about the way that the author uses these to make a point of there is no future, like the future is irrelevant, right? And I think, I don't know, I'm quite critical of the kind of fetishization of like immediate action with not without intent, but without purpose, even in the short-term future, I suppose. But yeah, of course, like we can use all these things, or we can hold multiple ideas, and like Desert as well is one on my list. I do need to read it. But I think, yeah, more or less, like I said, I see these things primarily as a starting point. Like I said, I'm glad that you appreciated it nonetheless, because that chapter is, I don't know. It was the one I finished last, and I expect to get a little bit of flack for it, because Adorno is not exactly the most popular thinker presently, but I think it's a good, yeah. I mean, I'm glad you appreciated it nonetheless, I'll say. Adam really looks like he wants to talk, and we're running out of time.
I was just saying, I'd like to find like a middle way between Desert and Blessed the Flame, as something like Arms Joy by Alfredo Bonanno. I mean, as someone who's in a black metal band who is heavily influenced by Bonanno, I think maybe there's like a an intermediary between not acting with a program and not and acting for acting's sake. This is why I think there's actually some tools to mediate this actually in your book itself, Bill, with the references like the Invisible Committee and Tikkun, because they don't really give a program. The idea is essentially to withdraw from the sort of communicative, highly digitized mode of communication, and then to, as they say, find each other. And there's a weird affinity that happens, especially with metal, and it's in the most sort of basic ways. I mean, the amount of friends I met just by looking at someone's shirt and going, "Oh, my Storm Rage shirt," and then somehow you've known each other for years and years. And there's a unique vehicality to this community action here, which I think the anarcho-nihilists and the Adornians, and Adorno has its nihilistic streaks at times, especially when it comes to the unspeakability of utopia. So maybe there's a Adornian black metal band there, although maybe the far right might agree with him on jazz. But regardless, so tonight it's a world we bury. It is out on April the 11th this year. I'm sorry, I didn't look up Adornray touring or have anything else coming out to plug. I can't remember. I'm really sorry.
It's all right. I would say that we have a new record coming out, which is actually called To Know the Light, which links really well to the concept of darkness and coldness within black metal. So it's deliberately playing with that. It's called To Know the Light. It's coming out on March 24th, and we will tour the UK around it. Got some summer festivals, some more UK and EU shows later this year, and then back to North America early next year. And hopefully we will be in Australia as well in 2024 if everything comes to plan. But yeah, I should definitely say we have a record coming out.
I will try and make one of those gigs. It's been like 7 years since I saw like Dawn Rave for the first. And awesome. I need to come and not so drunkenly chat your ears off about Max Stirner again. But everyone, tonight is a world we bury out April 11th. Soon there'll be a little weekend of Repeater Radio. I know, Bill, you often host some black metal evenings on Repeater Radio. There's some mixes coming up soon. They'll be announced. I've done a mix on it. There's some Dawn Raid on it, some Liturgy and Al-Nafrak, summoning unlikely anti-fascist heroes. They're not as vocal about as they could be. Damn right they can be comrades. Everyone, this has been Baroque Sunburst on the second, more Kriegy edition. You know, as Christ said, we'll burn the church down in 3 days, and then we might build something afterwards. Catch you guys later.
We appreciate your support of the imprint and the channel. Subscribe to Zero Books Today on Patreon. Your material support helps us to promote a variety of perspectives on the left. Also, discover the many titles, new and old, that Zero has curated. Navigate to any of the links in the show notes to extend your support.